I didn't expect the quiet clinking of ice in a half-empty glass to sound so loud in someone else's house, especially not in the house that was supposed to be ours. But then again, everything had felt borrowed lately. The walls, the warmth, even the marriage. I had come to the lakehouse for peace, or at least the illusion of it. The sort of peace that came with long stretches of still water and tall, unmoving pines. My spouse, however, had other ideas. The liquor cabinet was the first thing they opened after we arrived, and like every other visit here, they'd slipped into that familiar fog by nightfall. But he was here too. Jason. I still remember the way he had looked at me the first time we met. Cautious, like someone appraising a situation that didn't quite make sense. He was 18 then, barely taller than my shoulder, a little sharp around the edges, all pride and stiff silences. That was 4 years ago. Time did something to him. Filled in his shoulders, softened his jaw with a shadow of scruff, pulled his voice down a few octaves. I noticed more than I meant to. Still do. He called me by my first name now. Not Dad. Not that he ever had. Not even when I married his father. It was always just Michael. Like we were two men meeting in some undefined middle space. Not quite. Strangers. Not quite family. He'd come down for the weekend, said he needed a break from his apartment in the city. I'd smiled and nodded, pretending not to feel the tiny flare of anticipation under my ribs. I hated how much I looked forward to his visits, how I'd started wearing nicer shirts when I knew he'd be around. How I kept watching him out of the corner of my eye like a secret I didn't want to admit, even to myself. Tonight, it was just the two of us by the fire pit, after the rest had either passed out or disappeared into their phones. The flames cracked, softly, casting long shadows over the patio. Jason sat opposite me, barefoot, nursing a beer, sleeves rolled up. His eyes kept drifting to the fire, but I could feel his attention pulsing like a heartbeat whenever it flicked my way. "You always this quiet?" he asked, his voice low and dry like he already knew the answer. I gave him a half smile. "Only when there's too much to say." He smirked at that, soft, lopsided. "Well, say something then." I should have asked about his classes or his job, something safe. But my gaze dropped to his hand resting on the armrest, fingers tapping a rhythm I couldn't hear, and I said, "You've changed." His brows lifted slightly. "That a good thing?" I don't know yet. It was a stupid thing to say. Too close to the truth. The breeze lifted his hair just enough to make him squint into it, and I looked away, pretending to check on the firewood. I couldn't tell if he noticed the way my hands trembled when I poked at the embers, or the way I inhaled every time he laughed under his breath, quiet, like he was letting me in on something private. There was something in the air tonight. Not the stormy kind, the still kind. The kind that holds its breath, waiting. "Dad's out cold," he said, breaking the silence again. "I think he finished that bottle on his own." I nodded. "He's been distant lately." Jason didn't say anything for a beat. Then he said, "He's been distant since before you showed up." I looked at him then, really looked. His mouth twitched like he regretted it, but his eyes didn't flinch. "Why are you really here this weekend?" I asked, quieter than I meant to. Jason didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, firelight catching on the rim of his bottle. Maybe I missed the lake. Maybe I missed the silence. He paused. Maybe I missed someone. Who actually listens? That did something to me. Something I couldn't name. He didn't look away when he said it. And I didn't pretend I didn't hear. The fire cracked again, but this time it felt like it came from inside me. Jason and I weren't close at the beginning. If anything, we avoided each other. He was finishing high school when I first married into the family, and the awkwardness was mutual. He treated me like an unwanted guest in his life, and I didn't know how to walk the line between friendly and forced. I wasn't trying to be a second father. God, no. But I also didn't want to be just some guy hovering in his home, pretending to fit in. It changed, slowly. The first crack in the wall came one late summer evening when he couldn't figure out how to light the barbecue, and I stepped in without saying a word. We didn't talk much that day, just exchanged nods and a few muttered observations about the grill being older than both of us combined. But from then on, the silences between us didn't feel as heavy. The next few years turned those silences into conversations, small ones, safe ones. A shared complaint about his father's bad taste in music. A mutual love for strong coffee and quiet mornings. The first time he brought home that stray mutt and I helped him clean it up in the garage. No. Questions asked. He looked at me like I'd surprised him. Like I wasn't who he expected me to be. That's when something shifted. This weekend, though, felt different. We'd arrived at the lakehouse with the usual chaos. Bags dropped in the hallway, half-hearted complaints about the cold water pressure, his father already deep into his first drink by noon. But for the first time, Jason and I ended up bunking in the same guest room, the back room with the twin beds and the one window that faced the lake. The room that always smelled faintly of cedar and damp wood. They really couldn't give us our own rooms, he'd joked, tossing his duffel on the bed by the window. Be grateful, I said. Last time, I had to sleep on the couch with a spring that jabbed me in the ribs all night. Jason chuckled. Sounds like karma. For what? He grinned. Being too helpful. No one trusts a stepdad that agreeable. That was his way, teasing, half serious, always testing the edge of something. I played along, careful not to overstep. But I couldn't ignore the way his smile lingered this time, or the way he watched me unpack, eyes tracing the way I folded my shirts before tucking them into the drawer. It wasn't the first time I caught him watching, and every time it made my skin buzz with awareness. That night, after his father had passed out on the recliner again, and the house went quiet, we found ourselves sitting on the edge of the dock with our feet dangling over the water. The moonlight turned the surface silver, and the lake stretched out like a secret no one else knew. You ever think about just disappearing? He asked out of nowhere, his voice soft. I looked at him. You mean leaving everything behind? Nodded, eyes fixed on the rippling water. Yeah, start over somewhere quiet, where nobody knows who you're supposed to be. I thought about it, about the version of me that lived here, in this house, in this marriage. A man who smiled politely, cooked dinner, and swallowed silence like medicine. Sometimes, I said, but then I remember I've got a life, a mortgage, responsibilities. Sounds like excuses, he muttered, almost to himself. I didn't answer. I just watched the way his shoulders rose and fell, the way his thumb tapped absently against the wood beside him. And for a second, I wondered if he was talking about me or himself. The next morning, a cold front hit unexpectedly. The thermostat in the guest room had been broken for years, and the space heater was dead. I found Jason huddled under both blankets on his bed, curled up like a cat, his nose barely poking out. He looked up when I walked in with a mug of coffee. Remind me why we didn't take the master bedroom. Because your dad's in there. Snoring like a chainsaw, Jason groaned. God, it's freezing. I can't feel my feet. I handed him the coffee, watching as his fingers brushed mine. Just a second too long. Not accidental. Not really. We could share a bed, I said, casually, carefully. Just for warmth. He raised an eyebrow. That your excuse? I shrugged, trying to look amused, but my throat felt tight. You've got better circulation than me. I'm banking on body heat. Jason snorted but didn't argue. That night, we ended up under the same blanket, awkwardly figuring out how to position ourselves on the narrow mattress without actually touching too much. But not too much turned into just a little. Knees grazing, shoulders brushing. The quiet inhale of breath every time one of us shifted. It felt intimate. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in the kind that settles under your skin and stays there. At some point, I turned onto my side, facing him. His eyes were open, watching me. "You're not like him," he whispered. I blinked. "What?" "My dad. You're different. You see people. You listen." I wanted to say something, to reach across the tiny space between us. But I just stared at him, wondering how long he'd been holding that inside. His gaze dropped to my mouth for a flicker of a second. A heartbeat. Then he looked away and muttered, "Good night," before rolling onto his back. I couldn't sleep. Not after that. The next day was supposed to be simple. Just a short drive to town to restock supplies. Some extra firewood, more eggs, maybe something that didn't come in a can. Jason offered to come along, more to escape the house than anything else. His dad had been on a constant loop of half-slurred stories and beer burps since we arrived. Neither of us said it, but I think we both needed air. Space. Quiet. We took the truck. The sky was that heavy kind of gray that never breaks into rain but carries a tension in it, like it knows something we don't. The drive was calm, mostly music and shared glances when a song came on that we both liked. That part was easy. But the truck had other plans. Halfway back from town, loaded with groceries and kindling, the engine stuttered, once, then again, and died on the shoulder of a back road so narrow you could barely turn around. No signal, of course. Jason looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Did you pay the truck to sabotage us?" "I think it's just jealous we were getting along," I said, popping the hood. We spent the next hour trying to figure it out. I'm no mechanic, and neither is he. Eventually, I gave up and leaned against the side of the truck, rubbing the back of my neck. "Well," I sighed, "we either walk back or freeze here." Jason checked his phone again, pointless as it was. "It's at least 5 miles. 6, if we follow the road." We exchanged a look. The air had dropped colder, and I could see his breath when he exhaled. We had a blanket in the back seat, one of those thick camping kinds, folded under a box of old tools. I pulled it out, shaking off the dust. "We should wait," I said. "Your dad might sober up enough to realize we're late." Jason smirked. "That's generous of you." Still, we climbed into the cab and wrapped the blanket around our shoulders, wedged shoulder to shoulder in the cold. His thigh pressed against mine, solid and warm under his jeans. We didn't speak at first, just sat there, listening to the quiet tick of the engine cooling down. Then Jason shifted, pulling the blanket tighter. His shoulder brushed mine again. "You're freezing," he murmured. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." He reached down and tugged my hand under the blanket, curling it between his. His palms were warm, confident. My breath caught. I didn't move. I should have. I could have made a joke, pulled away, said something about circulation or shared body, heat. But all I could think about was the way his fingers wrapped around mine like they'd done it 100 times before. Like this was natural. "It's weird," he said quietly, eyes focused straight ahead. "What is?" "This. Us. It's like..." He paused, squeezing my hand gently. "Like you're the only person in that house who sees me." My heart twisted, because I did see him. Every expression he tried to hide. Every quiet retreat from his father's criticism. Every offhand joke that was more truth than laugh. But admitting that, saying it aloud, would tear a line between us I wasn't sure we could. "Ever cross back over?" "I try to," I said instead, my voice low. Jason turned toward me, and I felt the weight of his stare. He looked at me like he was seeing more than just the man who'd married into his family. Like I was something different. Someone different, His eyes dropped briefly to my lips. Again. A flicker. I looked away. "Jason," I said softly, warning. In my voice. "I know," he replied, just as quiet. We sat like that, hands still held, shoulders touching, for what felt like forever. Every second stretched and warm and unbearable. My chest ached with the need to move, to say something, to release the pressure building between us. But I didn't. And then he laughed softly. "You always do this thing." "What thing?" "When you're uncomfortable. You start clenching your jaw just slightly. You think nobody notices." I looked at him, startled. He shrugged, a smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "Told you. I see you too." God help me. Something about the way he said that, so casual, so honest, made my stomach flip. I turned back to the windshield, trying to breathe evenly. But he didn't let go of my hand. Not even when his thumb started drawing slow circles against the back of it. Not even when my heart felt like it was about to burst through my ribs. "I shouldn't be here with you like this," I said finally. Jason didn't move. "Then why does it feel so right?" I stared at him, that reckless mouth, that quiet certainty behind his voice. He wasn't teasing now. He wasn't hiding. I didn't know what to say. My mind was screaming about what was appropriate, what was safe, what wouldn't ruin everything. But none of it mattered when his eyes looked at me like that, like I was something wanted, something chosen. The silence stretched, my fingers tightened in his without meaning to. He noticed. He leaned in just slightly, enough that I felt the warmth of his breath against my cheek. "Say stop if you want me to." I should have. I should have said it immediately. That would have been the clean thing, the responsible thing. But all I could do was sit there, not moving, heart pounding, staring into eyes that had never looked so open. His nose brushed mine. My lips parted, without a plan, without thought. And then he stopped, froze. And just like that, the moment broke. He sat back slowly, still holding my hand. His thumb pressed against my wrist, feeling the pulse hammering beneath it. But he didn't speak. Neither did I. We just sat in the dim cabin of that truck, with the world closing in around us and something between us cracked wide open, too fragile to name, too raw to touch. When the rescue finally came, his uncle in a borrowed pickup, annoyed and half drunk, we didn't talk on the way back. We didn't look at each other either, but he didn't let go of my hand until the truck pulled into the driveway. We didn't talk about what happened in the truck, or almost happened. We pretended it didn't mean anything, like I hadn't leaned in, like his thumb hadn't traced slow circles against my wrist, like we hadn't nearly crossed the line we couldn't uncross. Dinner that night was quiet. His dad made some joke about how boys these days couldn't even handle an old Ford, and Jason just smiled, tight and tired. I watched him pick at his food. He wasn't really eating. Neither was I. When the dishes were cleared and the bottles came out again, I stood up. "I'm going to go sit out by the fire pit." Jason didn't even hesitate. "I'll come with you." We didn't light a fire. Just sat on two splintering chairs beneath a black sky that threatened rain but held back, like the storm had paused just to watch us. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. "You cold?" Jason shook his head. "I'm fine. But..." He was shivering a little. I saw it in the way his shoulders hunched. Without thinking, I scooted closer and opened the blanket. He hesitated, just a breath, and then slid in beside me, our arms pressed together, just like in the truck. Only this time, the silence wasn't a shield. It was a question. "Jason," I started, not even knowing where I was going. He turned. To me, eyes dark and unreadable. What? But I couldn't say it. Not yet. So I said something safer. Why do you always act like you don't care what your dad thinks, when I know you do? He didn't answer right away. The pause between us crackled with something electric. Then he exhaled. Because if I let myself care out loud, I'd never stop hurting. That hit harder than I expected. I know what it's like, I said quietly. Wanting someone's approval so badly it knots up your whole life. He looked at me, long and deep. Is that what this is about? What? You trying to be perfect all the time? You think if you play it safe, no one can hate you? I didn't move. Couldn't. Jason shook his head. You act like you've got everything figured out, but you don't. You're just scared. I laughed, bitter under my breath. You're not wrong. You're scared of wanting something. That might ruin everything. I turned my face away, heart pounding. You're not going to let me stay hidden, are you? No. And then softer. Because I need to know if I'm the only one feeling this. His voice broke at the edges. Just barely. It undid me. I closed my eyes. I haven't slept since that night in the truck, I admitted. All I keep thinking about is the way you looked at me. Like I wasn't crazy for wanting something I shouldn't. Jason leaned in slightly. His thigh pressed harder against mine. You think it's wrong? I opened my eyes, met his. No, I said. I think it's dangerous. Because of my dad? Because of everything. You're younger. We're family, sort of. People would talk. Your friends wouldn't understand. You might not understand. Not really. Not until it's too late. Jason looked down at his hands. I don't care about people talking. You will. No, I won't. Because I've done the pretending thing. I've laughed at the jokes. I've dated girls I wasn't really into just so no one would ask questions. But I'm done with that. That stopped me cold. You've thought about this before? I asked carefully. His voice was barely above a whisper. Since the first time we went camping. That trip 3 years ago. I woke up and you were making breakfast, hair all messed up, standing barefoot in the grass. And I couldn't stop looking. I swallowed hard. My throat was tight. You never said anything. Because I didn't think you'd ever look back. He finally looked up, and something broke in his expression. Something raw and scared and stunning. But you did, he added, voice cracking. In the truck. You did look back. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. I reached out slowly, brushing my fingers over the back of his hand. He didn't flinch. Instead, he turned his palm up and laced his fingers through mine. I'm not asking for forever, Jason said, voice trembling with something close to desperation. I just want to know if this, whatever this is, means something to you too. I stared down at our hands, my thumb tracing the line of his knuckles. It does, I whispered. God help me. It does. A silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full. Alive. Jason moved first. Just a little. He shifted closer, our legs touching from knee to thigh. His free hand rose, hesitating near my jaw. I felt the warmth of it, hovering, waiting for permission. And I gave it, not with words, but by leaning in. His fingers brushed my face, soft, reverent. Like he didn't want to startle me. Like he was afraid I'd pull away. I didn't. Our foreheads touched first, then noses, then his breath, shaky and warm, mingled with mine. And finally, our lips met. It wasn't like I expected. It wasn't urgent or frantic. It was careful, measured. Like we both knew how fragile this was and didn't want to break it. His mouth was soft and unsure, and I felt the tremble in his body as clearly as my own. We kissed slowly, once, then again, just a little deeper, and I felt my hand come up to his neck without thinking, anchoring us in this moment. When we pulled apart, our foreheads stayed together. Neither of us spoke. Words would have shattered. Eventually, he gave a nervous little laugh and whispered, "We're in so much trouble." I smiled. Yeah. And I didn't care, because the storm finally broke overhead, gentle at first, pattering on the trees. And we just sat there under the dark sky, sharing warmth, sharing silence, sharing the terrifying, undeniable truth of what we were to each other now. The rain didn't stop us. It drizzled lightly at first, like the sky was just as unsure as we were. We stayed under the blanket, curled together on the old wooden chair, letting the silence wrap around us. Jason's head rested against my shoulder. His thumb traced lazy circles over the back of my hand like he wasn't even thinking about it anymore. Like touching me had become natural, reflex, instinct. I hadn't known how badly I needed this closeness until I had it. "How long do we sit here before we pretend to be cold and go inside?" Jason murmured, voice soft against my hoodie. "We could just admit we want to be alone," I said, smiling faintly. He shifted, his face turning toward mine. "So you're done playing it safe now?" "Not done. Just willing to take a risk for something that feels real." Jason looked at me, really looked. "It feels real to you?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, it does." His expression broke into something softer, something that almost made my chest ache. "You know," he said, "I always thought you were out of reach. Like, I was just the dumb younger brother of your friend, that I'd never be someone you looked at the way I looked at you." "I didn't know how to look at you," I admitted. "You were this untouchable line. I kept trying to convince myself it wasn't what I thought it was." "And now?" he asked, like he wasn't sure if he should hope. I brushed a piece of wet hair off his forehead. "Now I don't want to look away." He flushed. Actually flushed. It was kind of adorable. "I'm not going to be good at this," Jason said after a moment, his voice quieter now. I haven't really done this before. I've kissed people, sure, but nothing like this." "Like what?" "Like, it matters." I leaned down, kissed the corner of his mouth, just to feel him smile against me. "You don't have to be good at it. Just be real." He let out a breath that sounded like relief and laughed softly. "I can do real." We finally made our way inside, soaked and smiling like idiots. I grabbed towels from the bathroom, and we stood there in the hallway drying our hair, bumping shoulders like middle schoolers who'd just discovered they were allowed to touch. Jason looked at me, towel draped over his head, and said, "You know this is going to be complicated, right?" I nodded. "Your dad, your friends, my own second guessing. Still worth it?" "Yeah," I said, "still worth it." He stepped closer, fingers hooking lightly in the hem of my sleeve. "What about after this week, when we go back to our normal lives?" "Then we figure it out," I said. "One step at a time. We don't have to label it or announce it. We just keep being honest." Jason grinned, boyish and bright. "You make that sound easy." "It won't be, but if we're doing it together, I think we'll be okay." He nodded, still smiling, and then added with mock seriousness, "So, you're saying I'm your secret boyfriend now?" "Not secret," I said, smirking. "Just undisclosed." Jason laughed and shoved me playfully. "You're such a nerd." "Yeah, well, you're the one making out with the nerd now. I'm about to," he teased, stepping closer again. We kissed again, slower this time, deeper. It wasn't just about nerves or curiosity anymore. It was about knowing, about letting ourselves want. Later that night, we lay side by side on the creaky twin bed in the guest room, bodies barely touching under the covers. The door was closed, but our nerves were still wide open. His hand found mine beneath the sheets, fingers tangled like roots. "I don't know what's going to happen after this," he whispered into the dark. "Me neither," I said. "But I know what I want to happen." "What's that?" "I want more nights like this." Jason turned to face me. Even in the dark, I could see the hope in his eyes. "Me too," he whispered, and I believed him, because for the first time in a long time, the unknown didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. The morning was quieter than usual, like the whole house was holding its breath. I sat at the kitchen table, 2 mugs of coffee steaming in front of me. One black, one with way too much sugar. Jason's, obviously. The sunlight spilled lazily across the floorboards, catching the dust in golden streaks. Everything looked soft, new. Jason walked in, still barefoot, shirt wrinkled from sleep and hair a mess from the pillow. And he looked beautiful. Not in some polished, made-up way, but in the kind of way that makes your chest pull tight with something you don't know how to name. "Morning," he said, voice still thick with sleep. "Hey," I said, sliding his mug toward him. He took it and sat across from me. No hesitation, like he belonged there. We sipped quietly for a moment before he gave me a sideways glance. "So, do we talk about last night?" I gave him a half smile. "Do you want to?" He shrugged, but his fingers tapped nervously against the side of the mug. "Yeah, I think I do. I just don't know what to say without making it weird." "It's already weird," I said gently, "but it's also kind of great." Jason nodded slowly, eyes dropping to the table. "You know my dad's gonna notice something eventually." "I know. He'll ask questions. I'll answer them, honestly." He blinked at that, then looked up again. "You would?" "If," he asks. "Yeah, I'm not ashamed of this." Jason exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for hours. "Okay, that's a relief." We sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of quiet that comes with understanding. With 2 people who know that words don't always have to fill the space. After a while, Jason stood up, came around the table, and pulled me up with him. No words. Just his hand sliding into mine, like it had been waiting there all along. He tugged me gently toward the back door, and we stepped out onto the porch barefoot. The grass was still damp with dew. The world smelled like soil and new beginnings. Jason didn't let go of my hand, not even when we stepped off the porch and into the sunlit backyard. "This feels like a memory already," he murmured. I looked over at him. "A good one? The kind you keep forever." We wandered toward the edge of the property, to the spot behind the tall oak where we used to sneak sodas during family barbecues. The spot where everything had started to shift. Jason turned toward me, eyes serious now. "Do you think we'll make it?" "We won't know until we try," I said. "But I want to." He nodded, and after a beat, he slipped something out of his pocket. A small folded piece of paper. I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" He looked sheepish. "Last night after you fell asleep I couldn't, so I wrote something. It's dumb. Can I read it?" "No," he said quickly, then hesitated. "Actually, yeah, but only if you read it later." I took the note from him and tucked it into my pocket without opening it. "Deal." Then, without ceremony, he pulled something else out, an old braided string bracelet. The kind you make at camp when you're 12 and think promises can be worn on your wrist. "This is from years ago," he said, holding it up. "You gave it to me. I don't even think you remember." I didn't, but I recognized it immediately. "I wore it for a week before my mom made me take it off for church," he said, grinning. "It meant something back then. Like, you saw me. You noticed me. Jason tied the bracelet around my wrist slowly, fingers brushing my skin. You sure about this? I asked quietly. No, he said honestly. But I'm not afraid of it anymore. We stood there, his fingers still lightly curled around my wrist, the morning light spilling over everything. You know, he said after a beat, I used to think love had to be loud, all fireworks and dramatic gestures. And now? Now, I think it can be two people holding hands in wet grass. I smiled, heart full. You're turning into a poet. Shut up. You love it. He laughed, and it was real and warm, and ours. And as we stood there, side by side, unsure of the road ahead but absolutely certain of this moment, I knew the story wasn't ending. It was only just beginning.